Late 1944, a German officer, his uniform still carrying the scent of the Eastern Front, steps off a leave train. He expects the familiar sight of a bomb-scarred city, the skeletal remains of buildings against a gray sky. But what he sees stops him dead in his tracks. It's not the destruction that shocks him. It's the life pulsating amidst it. Through the shattered windows of a nearby armaments plant, he sees women. Not just a few, but swarms of them. Women in oil-stained overalls, their hair tied back in practical scarves, directing massive overhead cranes with confident hand signals. A woman with a clipboard and a stern expression is barking shift change orders to a group of weary men, some barely old enough to shave, others stooped with age. Another, her face smudged with grease, signs off on a stack of work orders, her signature a quick, decisive slash. This is not the Germany he left. This is not the Reich that promised to protect its women, to keep them safe at the hearth, raising the next generation of soldiers. The posters he remembers from just a few years ago celebrated the woman as the guardian of the family, the heart of the home. But here, in this gritty, deafening factory, women are the heart of the war machine. The ideological whiplash is staggering. For years, the official line was clear. Germany could wage a victorious war without sacrificing its traditional family values. Women belonged in the home. It was a point of national pride, a supposed contrast to their enemies who conscripted women into factories. But that was before Stalingrad. Before the catastrophic losses bled the Wehrmacht white. Before Goebbels stood in the Berlin Sportpalast in February of 1943 and screamed his infamous question to the roaring crowd, "Do you want total war?" The thunderous yes. That answered him was the death knell for the old ideals. Reality had finally brutally overtaken doctrine. To understand this seismic shift, we need to follow three interwoven threads. First, we'll stay with our officer during his week of leave. Through his eyes, we'll witness the chasm between the propaganda he was fed at the front and the desperate reality of the home front. His shock will be our lens, a personal human window into a society unraveling. Our second thread leads us inside that factory, to a composite figure we'll call Frau Weber. She's not a fanatical ideologue. She's a pragmatic, utterly exhausted factory manager. Her days are a relentless juggling act. She has production quotas to meet, quotas dictated from on high by men who will never see the inside of her plant. She has to manage a workforce that is a shadow of its former self, teenage boys, elderly grandfathers, and a resentful, underfed contingent of foreign-forced laborers. She has to plan for air raids, turning seconds of warning into a frantic scramble for the shelters. And somehow, amidst it all, she maintains a semblance of order. We see it in the small details. The creche hastily set up in a converted tool room, where mothers can leave their infants while they work the lathes. The worn-out ration cards exchanged for a thin midday soup. The blackout curtains meticulously drawn every evening. The chalkboard on the wall where a running tally of completed artillery shells is updated hourly, a grim testament to their labor. Our third thread takes us to the top, to the air-conditioned offices of Albert Speer, Hitler's Minister of Armaments and War Production. Speer was the architect of this transformation. A master technocrat, he saw the mobilization of women not as an ideological failure, but as a statistical necessity. He streamlined, he rationalized, he centralized. He was the one who bent the rigid doctrines of the party to fit the stark demands of industrial warfare. He issued the decrees that pulled women from their homes and put them on the assembly lines, framing it not as a betrayal of values, but as the ultimate patriotic duty. He created the very system that Frau Weber struggles to manage and that our officer is now witnessing with dawning horror. These three perspectives, the soldier, the manager, the minister, tell the story of a nation devouring itself to stay in the fight. The regime that once boasted of its strength now reveals its profound weakness. As our officer stands frozen on that train platform, watching a woman guide a 1,000-pound bomb casing with the practiced ease of someone threading a needle, he can't help but ask a silent, terrifying question. It's a question that hangs in the smoke-filled air over every German city. If the women are running the factories, building the guns and the shells, then what does that say about the state of Germany's army? What does it say about its cities? And what does it say about the glorious final victory that was promised? The moment you step through the factory gates, the air changes. It's thick with the smell of hot metal and oil, and a low, persistent hum vibrates right through the solace of your boots. That sound, It's the heartbeat of the war machine, and it's a sound that drowns out old memories, old slogans. I remember them though. The posters, the speeches. Kinder, Kuch, Tierche, children, kitchen, church. That was meant to be a woman's world. The government even offered marriage loans, but only if the woman agreed to quit her job. It all seems like a lifetime ago. Now that hum of machinery is a roaring crescendo. The old world was dismantled piece by piece, not by choice, but by necessity. First came the emergency decrees, quietly at first, then with increasing urgency. The same labor offices that once pushed women out of the workforce were now pulling them back in. Young girls from the League of German Girls, who were supposed to be learning domestic skills, were now being taught how to use micrometers, their delicate fingers measuring steel tolerances to a fraction of a millimeter. And as fathers, husbands, and sons were drafted, their widows and wives stepped into their roles, not just on the assembly line, but as foremen, as leaders. Take Frau Weber, for instance. Before the war, she was a clerk in a quiet office, filing papers. Now she practically runs this place. Her ascent wasn't planned. It was forged in the absence of men. One by one, the male supervisors vanished, their names appearing on lists for the Eastern Front, and with each departure, more responsibility fell to her. First, she was managing a single production line, then a whole section. Now I hear she signs requisitions for entire departments, orders that used to require a director's signature. This is the reality of what some are calling the Armaments miracle. When Albert Speer took over in '42, the entire system was centralized. Production quotas became everything. Output had to increase, despite the constant threat of Allied bombers, despite dwindling resources. That meant longer shifts, tighter controls, and a relentless push for efficiency. And it's working. Look around. The sheer volume of material being moved, assembled, and shipped out is staggering. It's a testament to German ingenuity and resolve. But it's a complicated picture. As I walk these floors, I see more than just German women. I see the cloth badges sewn onto the jackets of the Ostarbeiterin, the women brought in from the east. I see French prisoners of war, their faces grim, working under the watchful eye of armed guards. They are part of this miracle, too. Millions of them. Their forced labor is woven into the very fabric of this production surge. Their presence makes this whole enterprise possible, and yet, it casts a long shadow. There's a pride in what we're achieving here, a defiant roar against our enemies. But there's an unease too, a quiet question that hangs in the metallic air. The officer leading my tour mentions Frau Weber again, his tone a mixture of awe and disbelief. She makes decisions that determine the output of 10,000 workers, he says, shaking his head. A woman. He doesn't need to say more. The sentiment is clear. The world has been turned upside down. The traditional order is gone, replaced by this new, frantic, and brutally effective system where competence, not gender, is the only thing that matters. We approach her office, a small glass-walled box overlooking the main assembly floor. Inside, she's bent over a complex production schedule, her expression intense, unreadable. Just as the officer raises his hand to knock, a sound cuts through the factory's roar. A high, piercing wail that rises and falls, a predator's cry from the sky. The air raid siren. Instantly, the rhythm of the factory stutters. Heads snap up. Eyes turn towards the exits, towards the shelters. But on the main line, a critical shipment of tank transmissions is just a few dozen steps from completion. Frau Weber looks up, her eyes scanning the factory floor, then locking onto that unfinished order. The lights flicker once. She has seconds to make a choice, shut everything down, send hundreds of workers to the relative safety of the bunkers, or push for those last few feet to get that vital order out before the bombs fall and the power dies completely. The red glow of the air raid siren bathes everything in an eerie, pulsating light. Below, the factory floor is a hive of controlled chaos. This isn't panic, this is grim routine. Women, their faces smudged with grease and resolve, heave against massive steel fire doors, their muscles straining to seal the workshop against the coming storm. On the roof, a bucket brigade stands silhouetted against the crimson sky, their movements practiced, almost a dance, as they prepare for the incendiaries. The first shockwave hits. The entire building shudders, a deep groan of tortured metal. Down on the line, lays fall silent. Hands, already blistered and calloused, work with desperate speed to restart them. Bearings, jarred from their alignment by the concussion, have to be reseated. It's delicate work, done with trembling fingers under the constant threat of another blast. The air is thick with the smell of ozone, cordite, and sweat. In the relative quiet of a concrete stairwell, the officer has an uneasy conversation with a party official. The man's face is a mask of bureaucratic indifference. He doesn't care about the bombs. He cares about quotas. The Führer expects discipline. The fatherland expects production. He drones, his words almost lost in the din. The officer just nods, his jaw tight. What can he say? That the machines are failing? That the people are exhausted? Nearby, in the plant infirmary, a makeshift clinic lit by a single swaying bulb, a nurse works without looking up. Her needle flashes as she stitches a deep gash on a worker's hand. She doesn't have time for anesthetics. Hold still, she murmurs, her voice a strange mix of sternness and sympathy. We need you back on the line. Out on the floor, a teenage machinist, her hair tucked under a scarf, boasts to the older men around her. I can hold this tolerance to 1,000th of a millimeter, she declares, her voice cutting through the noise. Better than any of you taught me. There's no arrogance in her tone, just a fierce, unshakable pride. It's a fact. In this new world, it has to be. But beneath the surface of this unified effort, fear and suspicion fester like a wound. Whispers of sabotage slither through the ranks. Who left that wrench near the main turbine? Was it carelessness or something more? A foreign worker, a forced laborer from the east, is seen slipping a folded note into a German woman's hand. Their eyes meet for a fraction of a second, a universe of unspoken terror passing between them. The threat of denunciation hangs over everyone. A wrong word, a misplaced glance, could mean a visit from the Gestapo. The transformation isn't confined to these factory walls. It's happening all across the city, all across the Reich. You see it in the determined faces of the women manning the flak batteries, their eyes scanning the sky for enemy bombers. You see it at the rail yards, where they reroute trains through a labyrinth of cratered tracks, piecing together the nation's broken supply lines. In the telegraph offices, their fingers fly across the keys, transmitting orders, holding together the frayed nerves of a teetering state. The truth of this new reality is etched into small, everyday artifacts. The work cards stamped with the stark block letters, unabkenklich indispensable. The propaganda posters of Goebbels's Todlerkrieg, Total War, peeling and curling on the damp brick walls, a constant mocking reminder of the price. A pay packet, handed over at the end of a grueling 70-hour week, feels impossibly light, its contents rendered almost worthless by runaway inflation. For the officer, a man schooled in the rigid certainties of command and ideology, it's a disorienting revelation. He looks at these women, these people his worldview had dismissed as second tier, and sees them running the entire home front. They are the gears, the engine, the very backbone of the war effort. His training offered no manual for this. A junior aide finds him staring out at the burning skyline. The boy's face is pale. Sir, he says, his voice barely a whisper. A message from Berlin. The Betriebsführer. The plant manager. He's been reported missing in action on the Eastern Front. The officer turns slowly. Before he can process the news, the aide adds, they spoke with Frau Weber. They told her, unofficially, she is now the acting Betriebsführerin. The scene shifts. Frau Weber stands at the manager's office door. It's quiet here, insulated from the factory's roar. The aide stands before her, holding out a heavy ring of keys. They catch the dim light. She looks at the keys, then at her own hand stained, scarred, but steady. Outside, the searchlights continue their silent, sweeping ballet across the sky, probing the darkness. Slowly, deliberately, she reaches out and accepts the keys. Hello and welcome back. 1945 dawned not with hope, but with the shriek of air raid sirens. The war was no longer something distant, fought on maps and in newsreels. It was here, above our heads, and in our empty stomachs. The sprawling rail lines that were the factory's arteries were now severed one by one. Steel shipments dwindled to a trickle, then stopped. Coal, the very lifeblood of our furnaces, arrived weeks late, if at all. Entire shifts would scatter midway through the day, the drone of approaching bombers sending us scrambling for the shelters. The work didn't stop, though. It just became desperate. Frau Weber, our stoic forewoman, became a battlefield commander. I watched her argue, plead. and bargain with a furious station master for a single locomotive slot on a choked railway line. When a critical stamping press broke down, with no spare parts to be had, she didn't hesitate. She pointed to 2 idle machines in the corner, gathering dust. "Cannibalize them," she ordered. "We need this one running by midnight." Her most daring move was assigning women to night convoy duty. They drove rickety trucks through the firebombed ruins of the city to fetch a crate of ball bearings from a warehouse. It was a journey through hell, but they returned, faces smeared with soot, the precious cargo intact. The war's collapse felt personal, intimate. The officer, the one who'd become a familiar, quiet presence, was recalled from his leave. A telegram arrived, its words stark and terrifying. A massive breakthrough on the Eastern Front. He had only hours. I saw him in his final moments at the factory, not barking orders but on his knees, a welding torch in hand, helping to repair an engine mount. The skilled welder had been conscripted into the Volkssturm, the People's Storm, a last-ditch defense force of old men and boys. As the officer worked, he watched the women Frau Weber and her lieutenants coordinating the entire factory floor. They moved with the precision of a general staff, rerouting materials, reassigning workers, solving one impossible problem after another. But let's not mistake this for a story of pure heroism. Courage and coercion lived side by side. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter, their primary job now to herd the foreign laborers back to their barracks after every raid. A small, nondescript desk appeared near the main office, manned by a man in a plain suit who never spoke but watched everything. The Gestapo had a permanent presence now. Posters went up overnight, their stark red and black letters screaming threats. Work sabotage is treason. The penalty is death. One by one, the fathers vanished, swallowed by the Volkssturm. Their wives and mothers would appear the next day, their eyes hollow but their hands steady, taking their places on the assembly line, feeding their children on bread and thin soup, and then taking their turn on the anti-aircraft guns mounted on the factory roof. Then came the final, impossible order. A directive from the party: dismantle the factory. Evacuate all critical machinery westward, away from the advancing front. Party officials arrived, their faces grim, demanding immediate compliance. But it was a fantasy. We had no fuel. The trucks we had were broken down or requisitioned. The city itself was a graveyard of rubble, a fortress of debris hemming us in. To obey was to fail, to destroy what little we had left for nothing. Frau Weber and the officer stood together, looking at the order, then at the faces of the people around them. They had to choose between feudal obedience to a dying regime and the survival of the people and the tools that were there. Only hope for a future, whatever that might be. The decision was made in silence, a shared glance of understanding. In the deepest hour of the night, before the false dawn, the great factory gates creaked open. There was no official order, no fanfare. Just a low rumble as the first of a last illegal convoy rolled out, its headlights cutting a weak path through the darkness. It wasn't heading west. It was heading into the heart of the ruined city, into a landscape of cinders, carrying not the machinery of war, but the seeds of whatever came next. The convoy didn't get far. Just a few kilometers down the road, the drone of Allied fighter bombers forced the trucks to scatter, seeking shelter under the cold concrete of the viaducts. The drivers huddled, waiting for a break in the raids that never seemed to come. The young officer escorting them knew his time was up. He was due back at his unit, a unit that was likely already being torn apart on the front lines. He looked at the trucks, filled with parts that were now utterly useless without a path forward. In a final quiet act of defiance against the inevitable, he walked over to the military checkpoint. He handed over his papers, his authority, everything he had left, and told them to let the trucks pass. It was a small gesture, a single choice in a sea of chaos, but it was everything. This single scene captures the real story of the German war economy's collapse. By the spring of 1945, the war machine wasn't stopped by strikes or rebellion on the factory floor. It was strangled. The intricate web of transport, fuel, and power that fed the factories simply disintegrated. The end didn't come with a bang, but with a slow, grinding halt. Imagine the scene inside those factories. The deafening roar of machinery gives way to an eerie silence. The only sound is the soft, rhythmic sweeping of women clearing away shattered glass from bombed-out windows. These are the same women who, just weeks later, would be known as the asterisk Trümmerfrauen, the rubble women. Their hands, once skilled at assembling delicate electronics, are now calloused from clearing bricks and mortar, rebuilding their cities one stone at a time. The foreign laborers, the forced workers who had been the unwilling engine of the war effort, simply walk away. They drift down roads leading away from the factories, some clutching small parcels of food given to them by their former German overseers, a quiet, belated act of contrition in a world turned upside down. So, what does it all mean? It's not about keeping score, but understanding the complex reality. Germany mobilized its women late and unevenly compared to Britain or the Soviet Union. The regime was trapped by its own rigid ideology about a woman's place being in the home. Instead, it relied heavily on millions of forced laborers to keep the factories running. The Nazis only abandoned their own gender rules when total defeat was staring them in the face. For the soldiers and officers who survived the front and returned home, the sight was bewildering. They saw women running entire factories, managing supply lines, holding society together. For them, the initial surprise curdled into a sobering realization. While the army was bleeding to death on distant battlefields, the backbone of the home front had fundamentally, irreversibly changed. The story doesn't end in 1945. In the West, many of these women were gently but firmly pushed back into traditional domestic roles as men returned. The Rosie the Riveter moment was over. In East Germany, however, their wartime labor was woven into a new state mythology, the socialist woman worker, strong and equal, building a new future from the ashes. It was a narrative that served a different political purpose, but it acknowledged their contribution in a way the West often didn't. And what of Frau Weber, our factory manager? We can picture her in the final days, walking through the silent halls and locking a factory door that no longer mattered. The locks, the gates, the production targets, they were all relics of a world that had ceased to exist. But then, weeks later, under the eye of new Allied authorities, we see her return. She places the same key into the same lock, but this time she's not locking up, she's reopening it. She's restarting life, not for a war, but for a future she and the other women will have to build for themselves. If these hidden stories from the home front have reshaped how you see the Second World War, consider subscribing. We'll be uncovering more of these untold tales, stories of the ordinary people who held a collapsing world together. Thanks for watching.